Here I'm going to talk about what actually is PRINCE2. And if you think about it, well, it's a good place to start. Let's say somebody asks you what is PRINCE2, it's nice to be able to explain it to them. So you can say, well, PRINCE2 is a method for managing projects. Okay, so it's not just some random advice, but it gives you a roadmap to follow when actually doing a project. And it covers the who, the when, the what, and the how. That's a good answer. Okay. Now, if they were to ask you then, well, how does it do that? Then you can say the following. Well, PRINCE2 is divided up into 5 main parts. And with those 5 main parts, they actually give you the knowledge or the way to run a project correctly. So what are those 5 main parts? Well, those would be principles, people, practices, processes, and project context. So I'm going to take you through those 5 main parts now to give you a really good idea, well, a first good idea on what they are. Okay, so you'll be able to remember this. And of course, everything which we discuss here is discussed in a lot more detail later on in the project. Great. So let's start off with principles. So what are principles and why do we need them? Well, actually, principles from a PRINCE2 point of view really help to shape the whole methodology. They really help us as a project manager as well. And how do they do that? Well, they can actually help us to find the best option if you have doubts. What does that mean? Well, they help us to make better decisions, which is important. So if we keep these principles in the back of our mind, and when we come across something or an issue or something we have to do, as long as we remember those principles, then we can make a better decision. That's why I like the term principles are guiding principles, because they guide us to make better decisions about the project. And this will make more sense as well when you see the principles later in the course. Okay, but for now, that's what principles are. Now let's look at people. So why do we give a whole section for people in a project? Well, our project's success largely depends on the people involved. Can you imagine having the wrong people on a project? What's going to happen? Not much, perhaps. So having the right people is good. And we must understand the people in the project. So we must understand what their motivations are, what their requirements are, why they want to be involved in the project, and even their relationship from between these groups of people as well. So those are all good things. And you will really see that people are a really key component of the project. So the better understanding the project manager has of this, the better for the project as well. So that's it for people. Then we have practices. So what are practices? Well, these are different project management topics that each project should be aware of, that should be in each project. Best way to explain this, of course, is to give you an example. No matter what project you're running, you have to consider things like risk management. How will we do it? Quality management. How will we do it? To monitor and control a project. How will we do it? Or even to handle issues or change requests. How will we do it? So that's actually what practices are. They provide knowledge or information on all of these topics that are used to run their project. And so there we can see them as knowledge areas. PRINCE2 calls them practices. And then we can understand them, and then we can use part of the information that we need to use on the particular project we are working on right now. Okay. And there are 7 knowledge areas or 7 practices in total. So I think that's a good introduction into practices. Then we're going to look at processes. So what is a process? Well, a process actually is a group of activities, and then we can group all of these together and we have like a process for the whole project. So it's best to visualize this as a map through the whole project. That's the best way to see it. And it can take us then, like any map, from somewhere to someplace else. And from a project point of view, we want to get from the start of a project to the very end of a project. You could even say that a good project management process is like a path we can follow through a very dense jungle. That's a good way of putting it. And then the other main parts of PRINCE2 we just mentioned, like the principles, the people and the practices, they actually work with the processes, and you'll see this later in the project as well. And actually in the next lesson, I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of the processes, because it's going to give you a timeline of how the project works from beginning to end. So you'll see this much better. So just hold on a moment and we can go through that. The last area then is project context. So this is also important to get across. Now, why do I say this? Well, it's because basically our approach to managing projects will differ on the type of project that I am working on as a project manager, or that you will work on as a project manager. So for example, if you're working on a very complex project, which has got lots of people, lots of complexity, it's a huge investment for the company, a lot of people are relying on it, well then you cannot take the same approach managing that project as a small project. So there are different things to consider. So we have to make sure that the way we manage the project fits actually the type of project that we are working on. And another thing to consider as well is our whole approach to doing the project. So should we try to plan everything up front? That's more like a predictive approach. Or should we use a more agile way of working where we're learning as we're going along? And so that's referred to as the agile approach. Right, so I think I've actually covered, well, I have covered what is PRINCE2, and I've covered as well the main parts of PRINCE2, giving you our first introduction to these, and everything I mentioned here actually then we will discuss later on a number of times in the rest of the course.